Hey guys, it's Lucky Ghost here, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my solo werewolf build. This is a build that you can easily transfer onto any class in the game. However, I'm going to be showcasing it on a stamina sorcerer. I'll explain why in the video to come. This was one of the more difficult builds for me to put together. I knew what I wanted to do, I knew what it needed to have, but I had a harder time than normal figuring some of the items in this build out, especially sustain. But once something about the werewolf clicked with me, it all fell into place and it worked flawlessly. As usual, I'll be playing the trifecta footage of my run through Vodashon Hollows in the background so that you can see how the build performs, how it works, and what it looks like to play this build. It took me a couple of tries to get this trifecta, mostly because I was struggling with sustain. The damage was there as long as I could keep my sustain in check, and eventually we figured that out. So without further delay, let's get into what makes the werewolf tick. I'm going to be going over everything from race, mundus, attributes, consumables, gear, skills, rotation, passives, champion points, and more. So let's begin. First, for the race, I'm going to go ahead and recommend one of the following: either Khajiit or Dark Elf for the most damage, Orc as a runner-up, and then for improved sustain, you can go with Redguard or Imperial. And as I mentioned, sustain was a little bit difficult on this one, so it's not a bad idea to take Imperial or Redguard, or even Khajiit for the increased sustain that they provide. All in all though, if you follow some of my tips to follow, your sustain shouldn't be a problem anyway. As for the mundus, while soloing, we're definitely going to be going with Lover. We need that extra penetration that Lover provides, especially while soloing. Stam tunes always underpin while soloing, and the easiest way to help out with that problem is to take the Lover Mundus. If you plan to be doing group content, feel free to swing by a Mundus Stone and swap that over to Thief for the extra crit chance. As for the attributes, we're going to put all 64 points into stamina. And for the consumables, we're going to be running Lava Foot Soup to really help with that sustain. We are so tanky as a stamina sorc and as a werewolf, so we don't need the health from a buy stat food. We really just want that 500 stam per second coming back in, as well as the extra damage we get from the 5,000 stam bonus. Now for the gear. For the gear, we're definitely going to be running Zogvin. Zogvin is going to do a lot of great things for this build. One, it's going to give us penetration, which we so dearly need on stamina right now. Two, it's going to give us an absolute ton of critical chance, which everybody needs in Elder Scrolls Online. And three, and perhaps most importantly, this gives us minor force without actually having to have minor force as an ability on the bar. This is important because when you're in werewolf form, you have no other way to get minor force on your bar. You can only slot werewolf abilities. In comes Zogvin to the rescue, making sure that we have minor force all the time. It's absolutely a perfect set, and I wouldn't recommend making a PvE werewolf without it. On the body, I went ahead and tried out Sul'Zan's Torment. This is the new set that drops in Rock Grove. However, you don't have to use this set if you don't want to run that trial. If you prefer more of a solo obtainable set, go with the tried and true Briar. It's a fantastic set for solo. It will add a ton of weapon damage, as well as some incoming healing. Either one's going to be great for you. However, I really did like the extra damage I was getting from Sul'Zan's Torment. It really does feel like a great set. What this set is doing is providing weapon damage and a ton of weapon critical. And then as the 5-piece bonus, we get another 2,160 weapon critical, as well as another 12% critical damage anytime we walk over a corpse that has spawned a vengeful soul. Essentially, you're always killing things, and so corpses are always spawning vengeful souls. And that buff lasts for 30 seconds, which means you almost always have this very, very powerful buff up at all times. That 2,160 extra crit works out to about 9% crit chance. That's massive in Elder Scrolls Online. On my helmet, I did something a little unusual. I went with Blood Spawn. I ran heavy because it's what I had, but you could also go for light for the increased penetration and crit chance. I tried running light Slimecraw first for the extra critical chance it provides, but my sustain was an issue, and I really could tell that once I got the sustain figured out, the rest of the build would really come together. So I ran this helmet instead because it provides stamina recovery. An even better helmet than that would be the brand new Magma Incarnate. This is better because it's going to give you magica recovery and stamina recovery. So the only reason that I'm not telling you need this one is because while it is a little better because it's also going to give you mag recovery, which on this build is going to be useful, and I'll explain why in a little bit, it's not required and it's an incredibly difficult helmet to get. As far as veteran dungeons go, this is probably the hardest one out there to complete on basic veteran mode. I can't think of a harder veteran dungeon in the game right now. So for a lot of players, this is going to be unobtainable for quite some time. And that's okay. You really don't need the magical recovery, but it is nice if you have this set lying around. I'd go for the magma incarnate instead of the blood spawn. But if you don't have this, take the blood spawn. It's going to give you the stamina recovery, which is what we really need. We're only wearing one piece of the set, so we're not concerned about the 2-piece bonus. We're wearing one piece because we're pairing with it the tried and true Ring of the Pale Order. This item is amazing. It's going to bring tons of our damage that we deal back to us as health. So the more we're hurting the enemy, the more we're healing ourselves. We're going to be lacing the enemy with tons of bleeds and dots all the time, which means 20% of those bleeds and those dots that are on the enemy are going to be coming back to us in the form of what essentially amounts to a heal over time. This item is hard to beat when soloing, and it works great on a werewolf. For the back bar weapon, it's not terribly important what you have on the back bar because you're going to be spending most of your time in werewolf. Hopefully. I'll get into that in a little bit. It's one of my gripes with Werewolf right now. At the end of the video, I'll talk about some of the things I really like and dislike about Werewolf, and we'll get into this topic when we get there. On the front bar, go ahead and use a Zogvin two-handed maul if you have it. I'm using a great sword because the maul is literally the only piece of Zogvin I don't have, you know. It's just bad luck. It's the way it works sometimes. Ideally, though, I would be running a maul. Without the maul, it's still fine. If you have the battle axe or the greatsword, the build is still going to work excellently. All right, as for our skills, I'm going to go over the stamina sorcerer skills briefly because we're here for the werewolf portion of this build. I do have the Stamsorg build out there on the internet. It's on YouTube. It's on the build site. And so if you want to dig more into understanding the Stamsorg portion of this build, be sure to check out my latest Stamsorg build guide. I'll link it in the description below. But the way that we build this build is to spend as much time as a werewolf as possible, since that's what we're going after here. That's why we chose Stamina Sorcerer. The reason being, werewolves work really well with stamina tunes, so it was obviously going to be a stamina tune. Werewolves get passives to increase stam regen. For instance, just having this slotted increases our stamina recovery by 15%. This is our werewolf ult that we put on the front bar here. So it had to be a stamina tune, and you can put this build together on any stamina class. Just wear the same gear and then choose the same werewolf skills, and boom. You've essentially got the exact same build on any class. There are 3 classes that especially lend themselves to playing a werewolf. That is the Necromancer, the Sorcerer, and the Nightblade. All 3 of these classes get to use their ults more often than the other classes in the game. They have passives that reduce their ult cost, as is in the case of the Sorcerer, or they have increased ult regen, as is the case with the Nightblade, or they have a skill that causes increased ult regen, as is the case with the Necromancer. What this amounts to is these 3 are going to be able to get back into werewolf faster when they fall out of it, and inevitably you will fall out of werewolf form. So we've created a build that works incredibly well in and out of werewolf because I didn't want you to feel weak anytime your werewolf wore off. I wanted you to feel just as strong or stronger than you did when you were in werewolf form, and we've succeeded with that here. All right, on the front bar, we're going to be running bound armaments. This is because bound armaments not only does a great amount of damage, you proc this ability, and then every time you light attack, a sword appears next to your sides. The more light attacks you do, the more swords that surround you. Eventually, you have 4 of these swords, and after your 4th light attack, you'll want to fire this ability off again, sending all 4 of those swords into your enemy, dealing a great amount of damage. Not only that, while slotted, your max stamina is increased by 8%, and your light attacks deal 10% more damage. It's an ability I wouldn't build Stamsorg without. It's got to be on your front bar. It has to. And you could even argue to put it in the back bar as a bar buffer, but definitely at the very least, put it on the front bar. As for our spammable, we're going to be using Carve. This used to be Brawler, but we've switched it over to Carve because this patch they changed Carve to have a Brawler shield. So it gets the shield that Brawler got, although it's a little smaller than the Brawler shield, but it also gets a nice dot that stacks up to 3 times. This dot has been working out to around 4,000 damage per second for me on enemies, and it feels nice. And I really don't need more shield than the Carve is getting me. At least that's how it's felt, especially combined with the Ring of the Pale Order. So it's perfect. It's a perfect marriage, and I highly recommend using the Carve morph of Cleave now. For our 3rd ability, we're going to be using Executioner. This is our execute ability. In other words, when the enemy hits around 33%, you can start using this ability to execute them. This is going to do up to 400% more damage than is stated there, the 5,000. So effectively, it's going to do 4 times that 5,000 damage once the enemy gets really low on health. It's one of the most powerful executes in the game, and it's very satisfying to use. Just be careful using it if you have lots of enemies attacking you, because it doesn't provide the shield that the Carve does. So if you have 3 things or more beating on you, I would stick to Carve because it's hitting all 3, whereas execute is hitting 1. and the carve is going to provide a shield to protect you from the incoming attacks that those enemies are placing on you, whereas execute will not. So execute is what you do when you've only got like 1, maybe 2 enemies left and they're in low health. You can start executing to finish them off. The fourth ability on the front bar is a bit of a flexibility. My sustain was absolutely absurd when I was in stamina sorc form. It wasn't until I went into werewolf where sustain management became more of a conscious effort. Part of the reason our sustain is so great on this character is consuming trap. Consuming trap is going to place a very nice dot on the enemy, dealing a ton of damage to them over 10 seconds. And when that enemy dies, we get 4,000 health back, 2,000 magicka, and 6,000 stamina. Not only that, it's a dot that costs magicka, so it's relieving our stam pool of one of the dots that we're casting, right? Because it costs mag instead of stam, and it's giving us 6,000 stam back. It's just great for sustain. I can't recommend it enough, especially for newer players. It's very easy to unlock, and it's a very powerful dot, and it has so much utility to it. All right, the fifth ability on the front bar is Unstable Clan Fear. This Clan Fear does great damage when summoned, and it ends up tanking a lot of mobs. I don't know why or how, but it ends up gaining threat. It ends up almost taunting so many of the mobs I'm fighting. They attack it instead of me, which makes my life a lot less stressful when I'm running on the character, right? Because anytime mobs are attacking something else, I get to just focus on wailing away on them. It's pretty satisfying and it does good damage, and you can activate it anytime you want for a heal, whether to heal yourself or it or both. As for the ultimate, we're going to be running Werewolf Berserker. Werewolf Berserker is going to transform us into a werewolf. Yes, that's right. The whole reason we're here. While transformed, your light attacks apply a bleed for 15,000 bleed damage over 4 seconds. Your heavy attacks deal 50% splash damage, and your max stamina is increased by 30%. And remember, our damage is based in part on the size of our stamina pool. More stamina means more damage. While slotted, your stamina recovery is increased by 15%, which is great for our stamina, especially while we're a stam sorc, right? Because we're getting this buff just for having it on the bar, which means the stam sorc gets it too, not just the werewolf. On the back bar, we've got Endless Hail. Endless Hail is a fantastic dot, and it pairs really well with our Maelstrom Bow. You put this down on the ground, and the longer it ticks, the more damage it does, because every tick of Endless Hail is going to do more damage than the previous tick because of the Maelstrom Bow. That is the effect the Maelstrom Bow provides. So you never want to recast Endless Hail early. You want to let it expire before you reapply it, because the last few ticks are the ones that hit the hardest. Next, we've got Hurricane. Hurricane does good damage, great damage even, and it gives us major resolve. When you have this ability active, you're going to notice that you take so much less damage. You have 6,000 increased resistances because of major resolve. It's very satisfying. It feels great. You've got to use this ability when you're soloing. Not only that, when you activate the ability, you gain increased move speed by 15%. You'll definitely notice that when you're zipping around. The third ability on the back bar is Resolving Vigor, a tried and true, most powerful heal over time in the game. It's going to basically heal you for about 5,000 health per second when you're in combat. That means that if you're able to pop this ability, it will out heal any incoming damage the game can throw at you that isn't a one shot. The fourth ability on the back bar is Razor Caltrops. Razor Caltrops is here for one incredibly important reason. Not only does it do a decent amount of damage, but it gives us major breach, reducing the enemy's resistances by 6,000. Remember, I briefly touched on earlier, we need penetration. As stam tunes, we never have enough penetration. The Sorcerer doesn't have an in-class way to get major breach. It's one of the classes that just doesn't have it anywhere in its arsenal, so it has to get it somewhere else. On a stamina tune, we go for Razor Caltrops. It's a very large AoE ability. It slows enemies that are caught within it, and it reduces their resistances by 6,000, causing them to take significantly more damage when they are being affected by this ability. It's kind of a pain to get, but it's absolutely worth it. Until you get Razor Caltrops, feel free to use anything you want. When you're in werewolf form, this won't matter because werewolf has its own built-in source of major breach. This is very important, and I'll get to why later. Our fifth ability on the back bar is going to once again be Unstable Clan Fear. You must double bar pets for the sorc, because if you switch bars and you don't have the pet double barred, the pet will unsummon. So the front bar, the back bar, fifth ability is going to be the same. Our back bar ultimate is going to be Greater Storm Atronach. This is just an incredibly solid ultimate. It's one of the highest single damage ultimates in the entire game. So we've slotted it back here to take advantage of some class passives, as well as, well, hey, if you want to use it, you can, and to great effect. More than likely though, since you came here for a werewolf build, you're going to be popping that front bar ultimate and turning yourself into a werewolf and living your best life. For the important part of this build, the part you came here for, the werewolf, I'm going to go over the werewolf abilities and the werewolf passives because they are so important. You are going to be using every single werewolf ability that it lets you, right? Because you can only use werewolf abilities. So it's kind of obvious which abilities you're going to use, perhaps not as obvious which morphs you're going to use. And perhaps not as obvious why. And the passives really play a part in all of this. So let's talk about which abilities I chose and why. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go down the list. I just put them in order as they appear here on the bar. Pretty simple. For the first ability, Feral Pounce. We pounce on an enemy, dealing damage to them when we land. The important part about this one though is if you activate the ability again within 5 seconds, you put an intense bleed on them, which does up to 450% more damage when they're below 100% health. In other words, this ability serves as an execute. So make sure to pop your Feral Pounce on the enemy a couple times every 10 seconds. If you can sustain it, it is a rather expensive ability, so feel free not to use it too often until the enemy is below 50% health, and then you're really going to want to take advantage of that execute portion of this dot that it's providing there. Dealing damage with either attack restores 95 stamina and extends your werewolf transformation by 1 second. So the way I use this ability is early on in the battle, I'm using it once in a while to get that extra 1 second of my transformation so that I don't fall out of werewolf form. And then I start to use it more frequently as the enemy gets lower on health to dip into that executable dot. The second ability on our werewolf bar is Hircine's Fortitude. This ability is going to heal us for 10,000 health when we press this button. It's also going to give us major brutality while slotted. So when you're in werewolf form, you're going to get major brutality and major savagery because of the abilities that you have slotted. They're just bar buffers that come with a class, which means you can use trash potions. So while you're a sorcerer, you can use essence of weapon power potions, and while you're a werewolf, you can use trash potions because you're gonna get the buffs that essence of weapon power give you. The main thing to know about Hircine's Fortitude is it's going to heal you. This is your, oh man, I'm getting low on health, I'm kind of nervous that I'm taking too much damage. Boom, you pop Hircine's and it's going to heal you back up to full. It also serves one other purpose. When you use this ability, it's also going to restore stamina. So anytime I'm at full magicka, but I'm at 75% stamina or less, I'll go ahead and use this ability because my magicka is just being wasted if it's sitting at full. I don't want it to not be doing anything, so I use this ability to get a little bit of stam back because you will run out of stamina on this character if you're using the abilities effectively. And if you're using the abilities effectively and you're not doing something to counteract the cost of these abilities. Next, we have Deafening Roar. This ability is fantastic. It's going to do multiple things for us, okay? You're going to roar, terrifying the enemies near you for 4 seconds, okay? Which basically stuns them, and it puts them off balance. This off balance portion is really important. Anytime you get down to around 25% stamina, what you're going to want to do is pop this ability and then follow it up immediately with a heavy attack. That is going to give you 50% to 75% of your stamina back. It's insane how much stamina you get back, and this is going to be the key to managing your stamina on this character, is popping Deafening Roar and then a heavy attack just once in a blue moon. You're only going to need to do it in longer fights like the boss fights in Vodashran Hollows. You're never going to need to do it in trash or anything like that, but in those long fights, that massive stamina chunk that you get back from this combo, Deafening Roar followed by a heavy attack. You have 7 seconds to get that heavy attack off. That's how long they're off balance. And there's a passive here that we're taking advantage of, Pursuit, which increases our stamina that we get back from heavy attacks by 50%. We're pairing that with off balance, which effectively doubles how much stamina we get back with a heavy attack, right? So you got the 50% plus the double, which equals just an insane amount of stamina coming back if you heavy attack right after this ability. So be sure to do that as your stamina gets low. Once you try this out once or twice and you get in the habit of doing it, your sustain problems are going to go away. But that's just the first thing out of 3 things that this ability is doing. The next thing it's doing is applying Major Breach. Remember I said the werewolf has a way to get this? And that's really important because it's a stamina class. It has to have Major Breach. Well, Zos knew that, and so they gave it to it. Here it gets Major Breach and Minor Maim. Major Breach is going to reduce their physical and spell resistance by 6,000, and Maim is going to reduce their damage done by 5% for 10 seconds. So you're going to need to cast this ability once every 10 seconds. And while slotted, you get Major Savagery. That's the other buff that the essence of weapon power potions are giving you, right? Which is why you can use trash potions. For the 4th ability on the werewolf bar, we're going with Howl of Agony. This is our single target spammable. It's going to do 10,000 damage unbuffed, right? So when we're in the heat of battle, it's way more than that because we have so many buffs coming in from our Zogbin, from our Sulzon, or from our Briar, or whatever sets you're wearing, right? That 10,000 damage is multiplied many times over, plus our crit chance going through the roof, and enemies who are facing us, and while we're soloing, guess what? They always are. they're going to take 25% more damage from this attack. That's massive. So this ability only costs 2,300 stamina. It does intense single target damage. That's why this is our single target spammable. You will notice though, once you start light attack weaving this ability, you're going to watch your stamina it's going to start bleeding, and it's going to start bleeding really fast. And that's when you're going to have to go back to Deafening Roar to pop the Deafening Roar, followed by a heavy, and then you can go back to your rotation for quite a while before needing to do that again. The fifth ability on the front bar is our AoE ability, right? This is our AoE spammable, but it's got more utility than just being an AoE spammable. This shreds enemies in front of us, doing a ton of damage to them, but it also puts a very nice dot on them that lasts 10 seconds, and we're healed for 100% of the damage over time caused. So this ability is bringing us fat heals, right? It's just bringing us tons of heals on top of our Ring of the Bell order, bringing us tons of heals. And for this reason, combined with some of these passives we're going to talk about, when you're in werewolf form, it is so hard to die. I mean, you feel like you're almost taking no damage, and it almost doesn't make sense because you're not doing a lot actively to prevent yourself from taking damage. What it is you have so much damage reduction built into the class and so much heal over time built into the class that it just kind of feels like staying alive is easy, because it is. And then finally, our ultimate, Werewolf Berserker. You can use this ability again when you're in werewolf form to bring yourself out of werewolf form. And strategically, there are some situations where you may want to do that. For instance, if you know you're going to fall out of werewolf form before a critical moment, well, it takes quite a while to farm up enough ult to go back into werewolf. This ultimate costs 255 ult. That's as a sorcerer with ult cost reduction, right? This is a very expensive ult, and it's one of the things I'll probably complain about at the end of the video when I'm talking about the things I love and hate about the werewolf builds. So let's touch on the passives, okay? So we talked about the abilities. Now let's look at the passives. First, Devour. And whenever you're standing over top of a corpse that you killed, you can choose to synergize with it, aka press X if you're on PC, right? And every second you spend devouring that corpse will add 3 seconds to the duration of your werewolf transformation and restores 8% of your health per second. Each corpse can be devoured up to 4 seconds. So that means in the thick of battle, if you need to, you can stop and start devouring a corpse, provided there's not that many things attacking you. But if it's 1 or 2, you're usually safe to drop down and heal because you're going to be getting 8% of your health back per second, and you're going to be increasing the longevity of a werewolf form. So you'll see me do that a few times in the video that's playing. I'll just stop attacking whatever I'm attacking, and I'll just start eating the corpse that's next to me just to make sure I don't fall out of werewolf, because, well, that was the whole point of this video, was to be a werewolf. Next, Pursuit. Increases your movement speed by 30%. So you'll notice as a werewolf, you are moving fast. That's not just in your head. You are actually moving 30% faster because of this passive. And it increases your stamina recovery from your heavy attacks by 50%. That's what we were talking about earlier. So your heavy attacks on this character are pretty nice. You know, they're AoE, and they're a conal AoE, and they restore 50% more stamina, plus when combined with the other thing, way more than that, right? They are very effective for managing your sustain. A lot of times I'll tell people on most builds, well, on pretty much any other build, if you're heavy attacking, you're doing something wrong. Your build is not performing optimally, you're not using enough potions, or there's not enough sustain. Like, you shouldn't need to be heavy attacking at such a DPS loss on other builds, but here on the werewolf, that's not the case. Here on the werewolf, they've kind of built the class around heavy attacking. You can see it here in the passives. You can see it because of the way they gave you off balance here. So they want you to pair Deafening Roar with a heavy attack once in a while to get incredible sustain so that you can keep casting these very expensive but very powerful abilities. Next, we have Blood Rage. When you deal damage, the duration of your werewolf transformation is increased by 4 seconds. This effect can occur once every 5 seconds. So basically, if you're doing damage while in werewolf form, every 5 seconds, you're going to add 4 seconds, which is going to be a large part of the reason why you can stay in werewolf form forever if you're in battle. Perfect, right? So if you're in a boss fight, you literally won't fall out of werewolf form unless you just stop doing damage to the boss for some reason. There will be times where there's nothing to do damage to, like in Vodashon Hollows, which is something I'm going to lament later on, and you don't have a choice but to fall out of werewolf. Next, we have Savage Strength. Increases your weapon and spell damage by 18%. This also grants us Major Resolve, increasing our physical and spell resistance by 6,000. So remember how earlier I said we're going to be using Boundless Storm to get Major Resolve while we're a Stamina Sorc to become basically indestructible? Hey, we get that skill, we get that buff as a passive. We don't even have to cast it. You're just a werewolf, so guess what? You get Major Resolve. And for this reason, as a werewolf, you're incredibly difficult to kill. The next passive, Blood Moon, allows you to infect another player. Yeah, so this is what lets you bite another player as long as you're near a shrine. This is also how you will become a werewolf, most likely. You'll go to this shrine and you'll ask someone for a bite, and someone will come along, they'll come up and they'll bite you. And as long as you're next to the shrine, you'll be able to do the quest to become a werewolf. I'll put a link in the description down below on how to transform into a werewolf if you need a guide. And finally, the last passive is Call of the Pack. While you're in werewolf form, reduces the cost of remaining in your werewolf transformation by 20% for each transformed werewolf or direwolf in your group, including yourself, up to a maximum of 80%. This one isn't that important for this build. We're running solo, so we don't have a lot of other werewolves running around with us. But it is nice if you do play with a friend and they're also a werewolf, you get to stay in werewolf form that much longer. Well, not necessarily longer, but it's easier to maintain. But like I said, you know, it's real easy to stay in werewolf form as long as you're in combat. It's the only time you're going to fall out of werewolf is when you don't have anything to attack. So make sure to feast on those corpses if you know that you just killed something, and it's going to be quite a little run before you get to the next pack of enemies that you have to fight. That's when eating corpses is really important. Okay, for the rotation, what you're going to do is you're going to start off by summoning your clan fear. You want that boy out. Then you want to cast your first ability, your bound armaments, right? Get that buff ticking. Then we're going to go to the back bar. We're going to get our boundless storm on and then throw on our back bar dots. Boom, boom. Now we're going to start light attack weaving our skills and any remaining dots we have. So, and then every time that the bound armaments shows a number 4 next to it, right? You're going to press that ability, right? And it's going to fire all 4 of those daggers or swords into the enemy, dealing great damage to them. So it's a bar buffer that also does great damage when procced, okay? And then when these back bar abilities and dots fall off, you go back and reapply them. Anytime everything's ticking, you're just going to keep brawling, right? You're just going to keep, well, it's actually not brawling. It's called carve now. That's the morph we've taken. And once the enemy gets to around 33%, that's when you'll start doing your execute ability on the enemy. All right, but what about werewolf form? The reason we're all here, the reason for the season. So when we're in werewolf form, boom, there we go. Our summon is going to disappear. You could cast Boundless Storm and throw down your dots one more time before becoming a werewolf, and I highly recommend that you do, right? So cast your caltrops, cast your Boundless Storm, right? All of those things will be working in your favor for a little while until they wear off. You won't be able to recast them because you're going to be a werewolf, and while in werewolf form, you only have access to these abilities here, your werewolf abilities. Okay, so as for our werewolf rotation, we can only use werewolf abilities while we're in this form. So we're going to start off by leaping, and then we're going to cast that again, get the dot on them, right? Then we're going to use our her scene to get stamina back if we need it, or health. Then we're going to use our howl. This is going to put a major breach debuff on the enemy for 10 seconds. So you want to keep this up, right? Then we're going to put our 5th ability. It's a dot. It's a very nice dot, in fact, and it's one that heals us. So we're going to make sure that's ticking at all times. So 3 and 5, we want to make sure those are always ticking. Okay. Then in execute, you want to make sure that this dot is always ticking as well. So once every 10 seconds, you're going to do this. Boom, boom. Right? So you can kind of make that part of your rotation because those are 10 seconds. Everything's 10 seconds. So you can do 1 twice, right? And then you can do 3 and 5. And that's, if you do those all back to back like that, you're always going to have all 3 up and going. And then when you need the stamina, you can use 2. If you're at max health, it's going to give you stam. If you're not at max health, it's going to give you a very massive heal. So if you're in trouble, 2 is your heal. And then 4 is your single target spammable. You just light attack weave that ability. Now you'll notice if I go through my rotation, it's very easy to start chugging through my Magica, right? Okay, so watch what happens when we do 3 with a heavy attack. Watch how much stamina we get back. There, the enemy's off balance, heavy. Boom. There's our stamina jumping up about 50% of our bar back to us right there. It's massive, right? So once again, let me just demonstrate real quick the difference between heavy attacking without off balance and with off balance. Okay, so here's a heavy attack without off balance first. Watch the stamina. There. Now here's a heavy attack with off balance. There we go. And heavy. Boom. Look at that. It's just dang near 50% of our bar back, right? It's massive. So you definitely want to pirate. Now there is a cooldown on off balance. So if I cast it again, I can't do it again, right? That doesn't work. You're going to need to wait for that cooldown. So when you see the little swirling mark over their head, anytime you see that swirling mark over their head, right there, see that swirl? That's a good time to heavy. That means he's off balance and you're gonna get extra resources for the heavy. So if you're paying attention, you're just kind of beating on the guy, right? And you do this ability, no swirl, hey, don't heavy attack yet. Wait until later. and then do your heavy attack. And then if you're doing a rotation, keeping up those dots, keeping up those buffs, and you see that off balance procs again, go ahead and apply it again. So let's see if we can get it to happen again here. Here we go, off balance. There it is. Heavy. Boom. Our stamina comes back. And that is probably the most complicated part of being a werewolf that's doing a tremendous amount of damage, is managing your sustain with that little combo right there in content. In a group, your sustain is probably going to be more than fine, right? You're going to have sustain sets on your supports, aka your tank and your healer, and you're going to get synergies. So your sustain while in a group is going to be great. It's going to be more than fine. It's just in solo where you're going to need to manage your sustain a little bit with that combination of 3 and then a heavy, right? Your off balance and a heavy. And you only have to do it once in a while. And it kind of becomes just second nature after you play on the character for an hour or two. You won't even notice that you're doing it anymore. You'll see the swirls and you'll throw a heavy, and your sustain problems will go away right away. As for the CP, I'm going to go ahead and link the written guide in the description below. It's just a lot easier to show you the champion points there than it is in one of these. And then when Zoss tweaks the champion points again, I'll be able to update that and keep it accurate for you. Whereas I can't exactly do that in these videos. So check out the written guide for the champion points. I'll have the blue, red, and green there. Okay, and then lastly, my thoughts on the werewolf. The werewolf was perhaps the hardest build for me to put together. I struggled with it a little bit more than I typically do. We nearly made it through Vodashon on the first try with the trifecta, but I could definitely tell that there was a few problems I was having. My penetration just kind of felt like maybe it wasn't right. My sustain definitely felt awful, and my damage wasn't quite there, in part due to my sustain. But a lot of that was a learn to play issue. I just needed to learn my way around the werewolf and how they wanted you to operate the werewolf as opposed to how I wanted to play the werewolf. And that really helped sort the sustain issues out. My biggest gripe with the werewolf is that you have to build 2 characters. You have to build a stamina character, and then you have to also build the build to be good while a werewolf, which means you've got to account for what buffs and what gear you're going to need for 2 different builds at once. And it can feel at times I wanted to be a werewolf and I was being thrown out of werewolf form, and it felt kind of punishing. And there were certain mechanics in this game where it felt like they didn't take into account the werewolf bros out there, right? Like there was no way for you to stay in werewolf form for this part, so you're gonna lose werewolf form, and it takes an insane amount of time to get back into werewolf form. Like it feels a little bit unfair when you're running through Vodashon Hollows and you want to do one of these mechanics, and it's like, well, you can do that, but you're gonna lose werewolf, which means you're gonna go through the whole next fight or 2 or 3 without werewolf form back yet, when all you wanted to do was be a werewolf. You know, that's what you put the build together to do. So that was my one beef with this build. On the other hand though, the werewolf, it was really easy to play. The rotation is really simple. It's a 1-bar build. That's why it's designed. You get your major brutality, you get your major savagery, you get incredible survivability, all with very little effort, right? It's very, very easy to play. It's easy for a new player to pick up. The first few minutes or maybe even the first hour you play it, you're going to be doing a bit of button mashing, hopefully less, because you watched this video and you kind of understand what each ability is doing and when you're supposed to be using them. If you find yourself button mashing again, go back to the part of the video where I explain what each werewolf ability does and when you're supposed to use them, and watch that one more time after you've played the character for a little bit, and it'll probably click right away. And then it's going to just be a matter of muscle memory and familiarizing yourself with which button you need to press in each situation. All in all, it was a little bit of work, but we eventually got this build to trifecta status in Vodashon Hollows, and it was a very easy trifecta. It wasn't difficult, it wasn't close, right? We got through it, no problem. It was a lot of fun. I ended up enjoying the werewolf once I really began to understand it a lot more than I initially had in the past. I'd struggled getting into this build, but you know, I finally found a way to enjoy it, and I think that was mostly just a learn to play issue. Learning to play the build the way that they wanted you to, not the way you were playing all the other builds. All right, guys, I hope you have a fantastic day, night, or evening, wherever you might be. As always, please be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video for more ESO content. If you ever want to hang out with someone else who loves ESO, be sure to swing by my Twitch channel over at twitch.tv/luckyghost. I'll see you in the next video.